Hey everybody, how are you? Hope you had a great July 4th. We are back for another episode of the Ship Show. Today's Thursday, July 6th, and this is episode number 25. And this week, it's that time again. It is all about the FMR, the Freight Market Roundup. But before we ask Jason how he is, we do want to send him a shout out and Sourcing Insights, our guest on last week's show, just to tell them what a great job they did. And the response has been overwhelming from our followers. So, Jason, I just want to give you a shout out, give a shout out to Sourcing Insights, great company. Everybody's got to hit them up. And how are you? What's happening?
Oh man, I am doing good. And honestly, I hope everybody had a fantastic holiday. Honestly, I am still recovering. Having it on a Tuesday is a little strange, really gets your mind a little confused for the week. But you know what? Friends, family, got to see everyone. It was awesome. I didn't get to see you, Anthony. That's the one thing. We've got to live a little closer here because you're the bright
Yeah, well, there's a bit of a distance between Philly and Michigan, right? So, my loss.
Oh my gosh. Well, my loss as well. But it is a bright spot for us to be able to talk about the freight market. And it's so much fun to kind of chat about and understand what we're seeing, what we're dealing with. And sometimes it's a little spooky because obviously there's a lot of big things going on right now. But as Anthony mentioned, this is the Freight Market Roundup. So let me make sure we're all on the same page. And just a reminder for our returning guests, or just a breakdown of our agenda for our new guests, because we do have a format. We try to keep it pretty close to that format to make sure, for returning people, it's very, very clear. For new people, it's very digestible. So the idea here is we're going to walk through our major ocean trade lanes first. We're going to start with the Trans-Pacific, and then we're going to move over to the Transatlantic, and then finally we're going to flip to the other side of the globe. We're going to talk about our Southeast Asia and China lanes going through the Suez to Europe, or even not quite to Europe. We'll discuss that in a minute. And then we're going to talk about our air freight market. We're going to talk about our oil and gas market. But most importantly, between each of these sections, when we're talking about one lane, we'll add in a little bit of stuff that Anthony and I are talking about with our teams and that we're worried about, or, good news, bad news, or something our clients are concerned about that we're focused on. So get excited. We have a ton to cover. And honestly, a lot. We almost need a second next week because holy cow, you take a day off. And let me tell you, it seems like the world goes into overdrive. So let's dive right into it. But China to U.S. West Coast. So as a quick reminder, we're going to just be looking at that ocean portion of the shipments. There's no inland portion in these rates we're discussing. So if you're shipping door to door, or even if you're shipping something like FOB, those rates are going to be more expensive simply because they include other portions of the shipment. If you want a better comparison to the trends that we're talking about, you're going to want to pull up that invoice and look for the line item talking about the ocean portion. And that's kind of where these dollars should start lining up a little bit more. If you can't get that information, you need to switch providers. And here at SCS, we've got an open book policy for some of our customers, and they love it. We love it. We get to break down rates in just such great detail and kind of discuss trends better with them. Anyway, let's dive into it. So right now, our rates are sitting right back at roughly 1,200 a TEU. So the trend line for this lane really hasn't been downward over the weeks. It actually keeps returning to around this $1,100 a TEU point. And what we've seen in the Trans-Pacific lanes, this is our Southeast Asia, China to U.S. West Coast lanes particularly, is a bunch of attempted GRIs. And when I say a bunch, really not too many, but every GRI that's happened over the past 3 months has really not stuck. I mean, for example, June 1st, it was our last GRI, for those of you who didn't know. And GRI stands for General Rate Increase, by the way. But it was supposed to be for $1,000. Now, only around 400 of that stuck, and it only stuck around for a couple of weeks. So our rate averages in that second week of June were around 1,600. Now we're back to that average of 1,200. I expect we're going to be a little bit lower in the next couple of weeks until the next GRI that kind of tries to bring them up again. But based on what we've been seeing, it's not sticking. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I am going in the the yearly trend of this dollar, the yearly trend for this lane, we will start to see it going up. We're out of the season where it's going to be sitting at the floor. But there are a couple asterisks to this rate trend going up that I'd like to talk about, but not quite yet. So first off, Anthony, I know we got a bunch of stuff on this lane. Let me quick talk about the elephant in the room, which is these ILWU Canada port strikes.
Yeah,
for and sure. Then I'll pass it over to you because I know a ton of stuff. So first of all, if you didn't hear about it, the port workers in the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, aka the ILWU, but to be specific, not the US ILWU. This is the Canada ILWU, and this is not to be confused with the ILWU that had their tentative agreement just a few weeks back. But Canada's ILWU, they walked out last Saturday morning, and that began a strike that hit the ports on Canada's west coast. So that included Vancouver and Prince Rupert. And, to break it down, that's the nation being Canada's first and third biggest container gateways. So this strike involves around 7,400 workers and 49 waterfront employees. And the ILWU is blaming the British Columbia Maritime Employers Association, or the BCMEA, for the reasoning behind the strike. And they're arguing that the employers are refusing to negotiate on the main issues. And it left the union no choice but to, escalate, bring it to the next action. So Anthony and I have talked a lot about a lot of different negotiations going on over the past year. And the main issues we have seen lately tend to be the same thing. Rail strikes were a little bit different. They had a couple other issues. Sick days was a really, really hot topic for them. And that just has to do with the way rail workers are employed and conventionally how they worked. So it was definitely a sticky issue there. Different, but for most of our port workers, it's the same things. It's increase in wages, and that tends to be a sticking point. Obviously, what they're able to contract out for their duties going forward. But then the third thing really is protection against automation. We always see this protection of jobs against automation as a big point. You can imagine, with technology being where it is right now, all of the ports are trying to automate every year, and the unions generally, that's a really big point of contention. West Coast, we still have some excellent automated features, but it's different than it would be given the union state. Now, so there's a lot of information on this, and honestly, it happened obviously right over our fourth weekend. But so these negotiations between the BCMEA, these acronyms are going to kill me, which is the Canadian affiliate of the International, and then, the BCMEA and the Canadian ILWU, they were paused on Tuesday afternoon, and this was pending discussions with federal mediators. Now, employers are refusing to give the ILWU Canada more maintenance jobs, while the union itself is digging in its heels on expanding its jurisdiction remits and demanding higher pay. So on July 4th, the ILWU released a statement essentially blasting the employers for using third-party labor to fill these maintenance jobs. And this is just kind of continued issues that's been going on. And now, obviously, the BCMAA responded and say, hey, you weren't showing us enough workers for these heavy machinery jobs in these ILWU halls. So as a result, we had to go out to third parties. But it's been really ugly. We watched the start of this seriously, within 12 days of them starting contract negotiations, there was already a cooling off period. It was crazy, and they're obviously starting very far apart. Now, what happened with the US ILWU was the federal government started to get involved, but that's likely not going to really be the case here in Canada. And, it's the Trudeau government, if you look in the past, hasn't been very eager to jump into labor disputes. And, there's a couple things going on here. This is a liberal versus a conservative government. If you actually look over the past 20 years, there's a pretty clear, you see a pretty clear image about the conservative governments being very apt to jump into these labor disputes, and Trudeau being a good liberal example, kind of waiting. We had a situation back in 2020 with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the Trudeau government waited more than 2 weeks to actually get involved. But it involved the blockade of, it was in protest of the oil pipelines. It had delayed cargo through Prince Rupert and Montreal. It closed down the Montreal Marine Terminal as well. So obviously a massive bit of congestion and disruption there. So I don't want to get too political with it, but there is a different state of the economy. So this also may not be as much the conservative leadership and means of getting involved with this labor disputes versus liberal, because there is this situation where, I mean, inflation is hitting Canada pretty hard. It's hitting a lot of us very hard right now. And we may not have, or Canada may not have a lot of public support for the increase of longshoremen's wages at this point. Now, I got a lot. I feel like we could do a whole show on this one, Anthony. And so I want to get off the soapbox. Do you want to add in your 2 cents on that?
No, it's a really difficult situation right now that we really have to watch, because, there is a lot of freight going into, Vancouver and Prince Rupert and other destinations in Canada. And, I just hate when this kind of thing happens, because it really, clogs up the plumbing of the supply chain flow. So I think we're just going to have to keep our finger on the pulse of this. What I do want to talk about, as long as it's okay, is I want to just go back to some of that Trans-Pacific, because there's a lot of interesting things going on in the Trans-Pacific trade lane right now. And I think, the Trans-Pacific container lines are really upping the amount of capacity they're going to deploy in August and September, as a lot of new vessels are going to be coming into the rotation that they ordered over the last 3 years. So it's going to be putting a lot of downward pressure on the spot rates, which, we're already absent of a strong peak season. There's really, peak season is a myth anymore over the last 3 years, since the pandemic unfolded several years ago. So, I've read a few interesting articles that really shows that the Trans-Pacific container fleet is going to grow 19.2% year on year. Okay. There's going to be an increase in capacity by the 4th week of this August. So by the 4th week of August, the last week of the month in August this summer, we're going to see a lot of new capacity coming into the rotations. So the vessel space between Asia and North America is going to increase at double-digit growth rates through early September, with a year-on-year increase of 25.2% in ship supply by September 11th. Now, the numbers of the new Trans-Pacific ships expected in August and September is kicking off a wave of double-digit supply growth for the global container ship fleet. And that's going to last well into 2024. And it's going to add another, I think the number that I read was 2.5 million TEU, or 20-foot equipment units of capacity this year. And listen to this, 3.9 million TEU, or 20-foot equipment units next year. So the issue for ocean carriers, though, is the new supply is coming as cargo demand returns to single-digit growth over the next few years. And, if you look at some of the statistics from the National Retail Federation, 2023 peak season volumes expected through North America ports are going to fall well below the 2022 levels. And just to give you an indication of what that is going to be like, for example, Mediterranean Shipping Corporation, MSC, is going to have an additional 136,000 TEUs in new vessel space this year. 136,000 new 20-foot equipment unit availability this year. And it's going to include 3 ultra-large container ships and 4 post-Panamax ships. So there's different classes of vessels. And, now there's a new vessel called a post-Panamax, okay, which is going to hold over 24,000 20-foot equipment units, just to let you know. OOCL, Ocean Network Express, or rather Orient Overseas Container Line, pardon me, they're going to have a 24,000 TEU vessel, and O&E, Ocean Network Express, will have two 24,000 TEU vessels. So, when there's next to no freight out there right now, there's some shipping going on. I don't know how the market's going to deal with this, because I can tell you right now, the spot market is much stronger than the contractual market. And I don't mean to be long-winded about this, Jay, but with ocean carriers struggling to secure volume commitments from most of the U.S. importers on the eastbound Trans-Pacific side of the pond, this continued softening of the spot rates tempts shippers, particularly smaller ones, not to honor their contracts. So most of these new Trans-Pacific service contracts in effect, that were just signed in late May of this year, container ship lines are already nudging shippers to meet their MQCs, their minimum quantity commitments, rather than take advantage of the spot market. And when you think about it, it's really a big difference. While larger retailers over this summer are shipping, with their contract or under their contract rates that are $200 to $300 per FEU higher than the current spot rate market, a lot of the small and the mid-size importers are shipping under the low spot rates while they can, knowing that the carriers are going to levy a lot of peak season surcharges this fall. And just this morning, we received a great communication from one of our strategic partners in China that represents us out there. And they're going to start implementing GRIs from July 15th well into the fall. So, as they continue to take capacity out of the rotations, not only in the Trans-Pacific, but globally, to drive this pricing back up, it's really going to be a mess. And with that, I'll send it back over to you, Jay. But I thought it was important that we kind of pass that on.
No, Anthony, that's spot on. That was the asterisk I was talking about earlier with, rates will trend up, except we have a mega influx of capacity. So in theory, they should, but will they? Oh man. I do have to harken back to this. So we had a show about a month back that talked about the new IMO regulations that are coming into effect next year. And it's going to be the great stabilizer if it sticks. But there is some news that China kind of does not agree with this new set of regulations. And quite frankly, I don't even want to dive into that right now because it's going to be a really hot topic. It just kind of popped out last weekend, and we're going to see a lot more commentary and a lot more information start to surface up because of that. So we'll cover that in a future show. But just to be known, while it is painful for everyone in the shipping industry to have these new IMO regulations, it was going to be kind of the great cleanse of the shipping market, as these new vessels would be basically the ones that would have the best ratings, and the older vessels start to be phased out. Capacity. So if we don't go along with that, we're going to have a huge glut of capacity for a while.
Absolutely.
And I want to make one more comment too on your National Retail Federation comment. They have been spot on with their predictions quite often. They made some predictions earlier this year. They gave specific percentage points as what the difference between year over year numbers would be, and they were almost dead on. So they've got the finger on the pulse of what's going on. And when they say 2023 peak season is not going to be as good as 2022, you can pretty much bet that they're right. Also, obviously, the ordering process has already begun. So, the data is in, the orders. So, One more thing before we move on. So we had a cyber attack happen over in Japan at the Nogia port operations. It happened at 6:30 a.m. local time on Tuesday, and it shut down their systems for more than 48 hours. It was following an alleged Russian ransomware attack, and that Nagoya, and I'm definitely saying it wrong. Anthony, do you know the correct pronunciation of that?
No, but this is a great topic because it's something that I personally research, and there's been 123 cyber attacks in the last 45 days,
Yeah.
targeting all kinds of infrastructure. And this was one of the hottest ones. Jay, why don't you tell us more about that?
Yeah. I mean,
This is one of the top ones.
It was not great. So it happened on Tuesday, shut down their systems for more than 48 hours. And this transportation association, they operate more than 5 container terminals. And thankfully they were able to get their operations restored at 7:30 a.m. But what we're seeing here is this dilemma where ports and terminals are trying to create these interconnected systems to kind of help the throughput of cargo, but it's making them much more vulnerable to these ransomware attacks. And it also is making it much more expensive to do supply chain operations with the overhead of these new technologies. So, and Anthony's dead right. We have had actually just over the past 3 years, not to mention this influx that we've seen, but we've seen some seriously major attacks that have shut down, even companies in our space as well. So obviously, we sympathize greatly with some of the pain associated with that. Anthony, dive in a little bit more to that before I move on.
Just, it's one of my personal little hobbies, this geopolitical and a lot of these things going on with the AI right now. For example, I think we're going to have to do a whole show on cyber threats and how it ties into the shipping industry before the year's over. But, like, for example, it's not cyber related, but it's sort of AI related, because even in Taiwan, many Taiwanese businesses are involved with the semiconductor, electronics, and the industrial machinery sectors, and they're really considering expanding their capabilities in the Philippines, because a lot of these companies in Taiwan have been coming under attack, cyber threats and cyber attack. And they can't figure out who it is. I think they have an idea, but they're not publicizing it. But I think the semiconductor industry continues to really grow, especially with all these new artificial intelligence developments. And many years ago, we all heard about artificial intelligence in the movie The Terminator. Okay, as crazy as it sounds, and here we are now in 2023, and it's almost like a reality where, with the exponential development of AI and how it's on fast forward right now, it's put really a higher demand on the chip manufacturing sector. So a lot of these companies in Taiwan are coming under increased cyber threats. So I just thought it's a little good sidebar to roll in there.
Fantastic sidebar. We're gonna speed along, and so let's dive into transatlantic. So the transatlantic lanes, 2 weeks back we mentioned that the major rate softening that had been happening in the transatlantic. So when we say transatlantic, we're talking about Europe coming into the U.S. East Coast. That major rate softening kind of found a semi-solid floor, and that is precisely what's happened. It's actually continued this week. So rates from Europe into the U.S. East Coast really have barely changed a bit. They've been sitting really stably at around 2,100 a TU. And, we at this point, looking back at our averages week over week, we've basically been at around the $2,100 point for about 2 months now. And, this was the last kind of stand lane in all of the pandemic high rates. We still saw high rates on this lane at the beginning of this year, while every other lane was, substantially cheaper than it was just the year before. So seeing this kind of at this stable point should be a good signal of that last demand that kind of pushed through the system. And now we have to kind of rebuild that demand floor before these rates can come back up again. So, just to make sure we're all on the same page, I kind of like to mention this as well. Pre-pandemic, it was pretty much the average at around 1,100 a TEU coming from Europe and going into the U.S. East Coast. Now we're at 2,100 a TEU. I don't actually think we can get near that 1,100 point anymore. Just the costs of shipping into that lane are just greater at this point. So, I'd be surprised if we did dip any lower, because it's really shown some true stability staying at that point for so long. But, time will tell. So, but yeah, I mean, if you are shipping this lane, you likely are going to be getting the best deals right now. So, if you've been holding off for some reason, which I don't believe you have been, you definitely should consider shipping now if possible. Now,
yeah, and Jay, just one thing real quick on that. Just remember, folks, about a year and a half ago, it was about 12,000 per FEU coming into the East Coast and about 10,000 into the West Coast. So, everything's kind of coming full circle.
Mm-hmm. It's really this big pendulum effect we're dealing with right now. And
yeah.
I know we all wanted to be out of this situation, but it was destined to happen, right? And so we just need to make sure that we keep our eyes set on, maintaining this year, being strategic, saving where you can, setting yourself up for a really fantastic 2024.
So, and Jay, one last thing too, before you move on to the next area on this transatlantic, just to give our viewers a quick update on this, is that with regard to the labor actions that were affecting the operations at the ports of Le Havre and Fos-sur-Mer in France, those labor actions have eased up dramatically, and operations are running as usual for the most part. Though even though there's a lot of volatility in France right now, the situation could always change unexpectedly, but thank God that has calmed down. And then when we talk about that transatlantic air market, that market remains very stable as well. Unfortunately, the demand is low, the capacity is plentiful, and the operations out of many of the main hubs are normal, meaning, London Heathrow, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, all of those air freight hubs in that transatlantic air freight market into the East Coast are experiencing no disruptions right now. But back to you, Jay.
Awesome bit. Yeah, and what's funny about that when you talk about air. So, I'm happy to say that we've wisened up shippers. We've definitely been part of this. It's definitely harmed the United States Postal Service. Let me tell you. So they are dealing with an unprecedented decline in international volume right now. So they've got this boom in cross-border. And that we're just talking about, North America cross-border. But if you look at their not direct ground cross-border, if you look at their, international beyond North America, it is ugly. So total USPS inbound international volume decreased by 74% over the past 5 years.
Unbelievable.
Painful. And outbound volume in the same time period fell by 38%. So this is, they released this literally incredible white paper. I'm like slowly digesting it because it's huge. It's all redacted as well. So I'm still missing some information. I'm like, okay, wait. But the plan here is they're not as competitive against some of the other international shippers, and people who are shipping the parcel shipments, they're using bulk carriers and then they're parsing them out. So it's not USPS's kind of strong suit. Now, there is a plan by, the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy. He's got this 10-year transformation plan, and he wants to focus on the cross-border package volumes to do so. They want to be more competitive. Obviously, we want to see the United States Postal Service do well. And we'll more to come on that, but ugly report that came out for the time being. Now, I'm going to quick move on. We're going to dive into our final ocean shipping lane real fast. And that is our China to Europe lane. Not only China, also Southeast Asia, China to Europe. So 2 weeks ago, I discussed a relatively massive drop in this lane. And that was true. But if you truly look at the dollar amount change, it really wasn't that bad. It was a percentage change that was greater than what we were seeing in other lanes. But from a dollar to dollar point, really, in all honesty, a lot of these lanes are, at bargain prices compared to what they were at in the past, obviously, and even comparable to pre-pandemic, if not at pre-pandemic rates. So, this lane is right now, our Southeast Asia to Europe lane, the most affordable it's been in years. And, we did see an increase week over week when we come into our last week's averages. But, right now we're sitting at about $12.50 a TEU if you're shipping along this lane. But if you look back about the past 3 months, we haven't seen this cost go over around $1,400 and under around $1,150. So we're squarely within that range, still very, very cost effective. Remember that's 1258 TEU. And yeah, but really, all in all, while it has not been as stable as that U.S. East Coast has been semi-recently, transatlantically, it still is pretty even keel. So it'd be a disservice to say it's having these major changes. Now, we are still seeing that inverted rate trend, which Anthony and I have been discussing, where essentially shipments that aren't going all the way to Europe, but they're stopping earlier to different ports, are more expensive than the shipments going all the way through. So, that actually was, if we kind of look at a trend line, around the beginning of June, it was at $2,400. Now we are seeing it at $2,050. So there is being kind of a pretty quick and steady decrease in that cost. And hopefully we'll see that back to where it should be, right in line with the cost of going all the way through, if not cheaper. But yeah, something to definitely keep your eyes on. And it's also something to be focused on when you think about where demand is and who's shipping to who and things like that. There is some big news going on, though, around these lanes. So specifically, Maersk, they are attempting to impose a 49% freight of all kinds rate increase. And this is specifically on this route. So this is going to be on the Southeast Asia and China to Europe route. And, what's funny is they still have a ton of excess capacity and they don't have any signs of peak seasons in this lane, but they're going to push it through. So just this last Monday, they sent out an advisory that basically said, if you want to keep getting our services and you want to have the quality of the services that we provide, you're going to pay this $1,900 increase. And this is specifically when you're shipping into the ports of Rotterdam, Felixstowe, and Dansk. And this is for $1,900 per 40-foot equivalent unit, so FEU, and it's going to be effective starting July 31st.
Jay, that's so big what you just said, because
Massive.
Folks, I hate to say it, this is coming to the U.S. market. As I said, we've received some communications from some of our partners this morning. It happens almost on a daily basis. And I can tell you right now, many of these container ship lines are so bloated from the excess profits they've made over the last 3 years. And now that the market's dipping and it's a shipper's market, these companies are sending us messages saying, like, hey, it's just not conducive for us to operate this trade lane right now. Instead of having 4 sailings a week or 2 sailings a week, we're going to cut that down to maybe 1 or 2 sailings a month from some of these strings in the various trade lanes around the world. And I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but it really gets under my skin when you hear something like this, because I hate to say it, some of these carriers are like the IRS and U.S. Customs. They have the power of life and death when it comes to certain things. And it's like, if you want to get on the ship, you have to conform. And the only people that get around this are the Walmarts and the Home Depots of the world that are doing 30 or 40,000, 40-foot containers a year. And like I said, I received a notice today that there's going to be an $1,800 GRI, and we are double checking that. So don't panic, but it's coming.
Yeah.
I hate to say it.
No, it's true. I mean, we've talked about a lot of really great topics on this show so far, and they really do paint a picture. We've got all this capacity, and we also have these GRIs that have consistently not been able to stick, plus the threat of the highest GRI we've seen all year coming out the end of July. And, if we go back to earlier shows, we discussed the contract season, and, it's challenging because we've talked to a lot of shippers, and they contracted at a higher cost in the spot market because it was a situation of expecting peak season to be back to normal land, right?
Yeah.
But it's now, I think everyone's realizing, we're not going to get there. What can we do to fix this? And especially, the capacity is such the monkey wrench in the spokes with all of this. If that capacity wasn't coming online, I think it'd be a little bit easier to navigate this. But you add in that factor, and oh my gosh, it's just going to be it's going to be a cheap shipping peak season. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jay. What else do you have for us today?
Oh man, we are already over, but I'm going to try to keep it going quick. So Another thing that's going on is Orient Overseas Container Line. They reported a 60% drop in revenue in the first half of the year. And that just came out on Wednesday. So this is just 2 days after the parent company, Costco Shipping Holdings, forecasted a 74% decline in operating profit for the first 6 months. And it blames those falling rate levels. So this is all signs that, there is just less out there shipping right now. There is less demand. And, it is also a pretty clear indication of what's going to be happening going forward the next half of the year.
Yeah. And Jay, there was one other thing I want to mention, and I know you know about this, but we just want to let our listeners know that UPS and the Teamsters have broken off contract talks as of yesterday. I'm not sure if you were going to bring this up, Jay, but the talks between the International Brotherhood of Teamsters and UPS broke down. It was a very bad meeting yesterday, raising the likelihood of a strike on August 1st for the U.S.'s largest transportation company. And basically, it's all about, wages and benefits. So this is something that we're really going to have to keep our finger on the pulse on, because, it's going to affect everybody, especially those. When you brought up parcel earlier, Jason, that, was sticking right in the back of my mind. I wanted to bring it up.
Well, I want to touch on that a little bit more because next week we're going to be diving into that topic really deep and talking specifically about this because this is major, and also it's a different category which we haven't really highlighted a lot on our show, and that is the parcel side of things. But all areas of parcel are also having their own kind of stressors right now. I'm just going to quick say a little blip about, as we get into air, about another parcel carrier that's having issues, and that's FedEx. They retired 18 freighters as part of a cost-cutting initiative, and they're planning to take another 29 aircraft out of scheduled flying for the fiscal year of 2024, with 9 that will be also permanently retired. So 29 out of scheduled flying, 9 permanently retired. And also, we have obviously the 18 that were just permanently retired as well. So just a little bit of a, reduction in these volumes, but we'll get into each of these categories in more depth next week. We've got a lot of great information out there, and we can paint a really clear picture of, the state of it and our predictions and such. But I think it's a great move into our air freight. So right now, if you're shipping out of Southeast Asia or shipping out of China to the US, we had a little blip in rates going up. So rates went up roughly 47 cents per kilogram last week. And this was actually due to a little capacity issue due to really high temperatures. So some flights were canceled. It kind of caused a little bit of shuffle. And as a result, rates kind of ticked up a little bit. Now, considering all the major US terminals, if you were, and this is air terminals, obviously, if you were shipping into the US, the lowest average cost we saw when shipping out of that Southeast Asia, China region was at around $4.15 a kilo, and the highest and most expensive was at around $5.50 a kilo, with an average in the $4.85 range. So, we actually were watching a downward trend in our air rates for a few weeks, and this little blip up I'm expecting to be kind of erased after about a 2-week period, and we'll kind of continue that kind of the air rate market. Finally, and we are over, but that's okay. Oil and gas, and on some, good news, especially if you are driving a diesel car. But if you aren't driving a diesel car and if you're a carrier, this is also great news, obviously. So $3.76 a gallon is what we're seeing across the board right now for diesel. This is down roughly 3 cents from last week. And, I'm pretty surprised it keeps kind of squeezing out a couple more pennies. So let's enjoy it while we can and make sure you're not paying ridiculous fuel surcharges, because it's been definitely long enough now where we've been under the $4 range where you should be able to renegotiate that. Anthony, that's what I got planned for us today. You have anything else you want to add?
No, but that show next week sounds like it's going to be a real awesome one. Great topic, Jay.
It's going to be great. It's big. We're going to have a lot of fun facts for you guys. And, no matter how big or small you are, we know all of you ship parcel at some capacity. So it's going to really apply to a lot of people. So get really excited to tune in. And Anthony, close us out today with your famous lines.
Make it a great day and a great week, and we'll see you on the flip side.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.